Okay, my name is Danny Robbins. I'm the director of the Nonprofit Administration Program at John Carroll University. Thank you for being with us this morning for our Ask the Expert panel discussion. As you may remember, we sent an email out to the nonprofit community in Northeast Ohio asking for how we can help them this semester. We do a free workshop every semester, and we got back such a range and breadth of questions that we thought the best thing we could do is put together an expert team to answer those questions. So I will turn it over to Paul Putnam from the Cleveland Foundation, who will introduce himself and our guests. Thank you for being with us. Please keep those questions coming. Paul?
Great, thanks, Danny. Wanted to start off by saying thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon, this morning and this afternoon, I should say. And thanks to Danny, excuse me, and John Carroll University for their work in serving the nonprofit sector, not only by preparing what we like to call the next generation of social justice-minded nonprofit leaders, but also their willingness to host a virtual forum like this. For those of you who have tuned in, you are in for a treat. You have this brain trust that across the country that is here to answer your questions. And I'm kind of excited that we have a more intimate group where we can have some really great conversations moving forward. To kick us off, we wanted to do just a quick round of introductions so that we can tell you a little bit about ourselves as panelists. Each of us are going to talk a little bit about ourselves, a brief background, things that we can talk about and answer for you. And then also a little bit about our thoughts about, the nonprofit sector and our role in making the field stronger. And I'll kick it off and then turn it to our panelists. Again, my name is Paul Putman. I am a Donor Relations and Technology Officer at the Cleveland Foundation. I've been there for 12 years, first as a program officer and more recently in this role with our advancement team. I am able to talk about donor advised funds, supporting organizations like the Higley Fund, organizational funds, things like that. Can talk a little bit about foundation initiatives, or I can at least help make connections if I can't answer questions. Prior to my work in philanthropy, I worked in higher education. My PhD is in urban education with a focus on leadership, and I ran the Center for Leadership and Service at CSU for about a decade. As for the nonprofit sector, I believe that our sector is really covering what the private and public sectors can't or won't do. And part of my personal goal is I do what I can to help donors become more passionate about their philanthropy, but also help connect them with organizations that are making a difference, especially those organizations that might fly under their radar. So that's a little bit about me, and I will serve as kind of your moderator for today's conversation. So please do use the chat function to add questions as they come to your mind, and we will put those together and get answers out to you. And with that, I'm going to turn it to our first panelist, Ian Goodman.
Thanks, Paul. And you all should know that you have a great resource here on the call in Paul as well, even as our moderator. This is somebody I look up to a great deal in the field. So hello, and I'm Ann Goodman, and I am currently a consultant for nonprofit organizations. I started doing that in April. And so my idea in doing that, I started in the nonprofit world as a director at the Cleveland Food Bank, and then went on to be the CEO of the St. Luke's Foundation, and got to see a really wide girth of nonprofit strengths and challenges. And I felt like, based on what I'd seen at the foundation and the breadth of organizations, that I might have more to give than money, which I know no nonprofit person wants to hear, but the sustainability and success of our nonprofit community, I think, is really a cornerstone of a strong community. So I've been fortunate enough to be involved in a couple of different ways in big community initiatives. And my hope is to share that experience with you and anybody who wants to listen in order to strengthen this industry.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ann. I will turn it over to Eileen now.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. My name is Eileen Saffran, and my background, my credentials are that I'm an LISW, a licensed independent social worker. However, back in 1998, I founded and then became CEO of a cancer support center called The Gathering Place in the greater Cleveland area. And I ran that for almost 21 years, and then handed the baton over December 31st of last year. So you can appreciate my timing was impeccable, wasn't it? And I went on to now the next chapter of my life, and that is much like Anne, starting a small nonprofit consultancy. And my goal is to work with small and mid-level nonprofits to help them move the needle. Thus, the name of my company is called MTN Strategies, trying to help seek practical solutions for the pain points. Because I know, having started an organization from the ground up and running it for 20 years, there's all kinds of pieces and parts that need to continue working and functioning together in lockstep in order to maintain and sustain and grow. So it is my hope that I can lend to nonprofits in the greater Cleveland area and beyond some of the, again, practical solutions to a variety of dimensions in their nonprofits. One thing is for sure, everyone who's on this call understands, you got to be a mighty juggler to work in the nonprofit world, because you are juggling lots of balls all the time. And so it is my hope that I can help sustain that juggling effort going forward. And again, pleasure to be here.
It's such a great metaphor, Eileen. LaShawn, we'll turn it to you.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. LaShawn Carter. I'm in Franklin County, Ohio. Columbus is our city seat here in the state of Ohio. And what I can offer, or what I hope to offer you today, is my career has spanned 20 years in working in the nonprofit and government sector. I've worked in university partnerships. I previously ran a collective impact organization that was part of the Strive Together network. For those that are familiar with collective impact, it was that idea of braiding public and private funding and identifying common metrics in an effort to serve children from cradle to career. And I also am currently the Assistant Executive Director and Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Franklin County Children's Services. So I can talk a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion. I've been a private consultant in that space for 12 years, providing ongoing training and consultation to government agencies, school districts, and nonprofits. So I'm happy to talk about what that looks like as well. And also, have managed government partnerships and grants for nonprofits, and how to make yourself eligible and also compliant with government funding. So those are all kind of capacities in which I'm ready to have conversation.
Awesome, thanks, LaShawn. And finally to Tony.
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I am Tony Spearman-Leach, and I would like to again thank Danny Robbins and also thank John Carroll University for this phenomenal opportunity. I am an emerging consultant. As Danny knows, I have been in the field for more than 25 years, and I have a varied path that put me into development and philanthropy as a profession. My most recent position was as the Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at Make-A-Wish Mid-Atlantic. Prior to that, I led a nonprofit that was a public access public television station, which is an entire 8-year journey that I could go for hours about. I have been the director of, well, they call it chief of communications and development for museums. And I also have a sales background. So I worked with CBS television and know how to use the sales techniques in our industry. One of the things I like to say that I would really love to engage with you about is that I have found a niche in doing nonprofit public-private collaborations and partnerships that I'm very proud of. And also, I have found a very, very strong and successful niche in corporate funding. And I know that a lot of you struggle with that. It is the hardest area beyond community foundations, Paul, to actually secure funds from. And so if you would like to talk about that, I'd be glad to share that information with you. And I've worked in large and small shops, so I'm very sensitive to your needs. So I look forward to engaging a lively discussion with you. And thank you again for this opportunity, and thank you all for being here this afternoon.
Great, thanks, Tony. And so a reminder to everyone on the call, this conversation is going to be a little bit different than maybe some Zoom calls you've been on. The questions that John Carroll received in advance were all over the map. So instead of a specific topic, we gathered what I like to call the nonprofit Avengers team with a variety of superpowers. And so for the next hour or so, we're going to hopefully answer as many of your questions as we can, or at least point you in the right direction. So again, a reminder, please use the chat function to enter your questions. If you have a question and you want it to be a little bit more anonymous, you can direct it to Hannah Hill, graduate assistant with John Carroll, and she is going to help funnel those questions in so we can get to as many as possible. We also do have a number of questions that were sent in advance of the conversation today. So we're going to start off with one of those. And this is a question that is directed to everyone on the panel today. And it's one that's probably not a surprise to anyone on this call. And the question is, what is the best way, especially for new or smaller nonprofits, to get on the radar of local community foundations? And I'll open it up to the panel.
Okay, it seems that everyone's holding back on this one, Paul.
Yep.
I will tell you my experience with a community media center access station and other nonprofits that I currently sit on the board of directors here in Montgomery County, Maryland. I'm here in Rothball. I've always found it important that before you even begin to approach a community foundation, make sure you have looked at their priorities, what they are funding. Make sure that you are a good fit for their history. But then I've also made a very diligent effort to reach out to the program officer at the community foundation and ask them, one, are you actually entertaining any applications at this time? Two, what are your priorities? Where do you see the prevailing priorities? But I also love to ask the question, where are you heading? Because community foundations have their collective funding, but they also, in some cases, have donor advised funds. And so I like to find out what are their variety of opportunities, what are their heights of interest, and really then go back to my team and see where we align before we even submit anything, before we even put anything down to paper. And also seek out your peers that may have been successful with that community foundation. What has been their experience? What has been their challenges? What has been their advice in engaging it? Community foundations are just like individual donors, especially major donors. It is relationship-based with those officers. It is relationship-based with your organization. And so nothing is more important than doing your homework and not disappointing them, and also making sure that you align and answer all of their questions. It is not going to happen overnight, and it is a gradual process. And that would be my best advice as you start out approaching a community foundation.
Well, I can speak to approaching a foundation, which the St. Luke's Foundation had a fairly restricted mission of health equity. And there were ways that we implemented that. And I, what Tony said is right, know whether you can fit or whether maybe you can fit before wanting to take somebody's time. I was always personally willing to meet with anybody, but sometimes it would be frustrating. And I think many foundation program officers just can't do that from a practical standpoint. But what I would say also to underscore what Tony said is that those relationships really matter, and not in the way of like, if you bring me donuts, I'll give you money. Though I'm not sure that that wouldn't work. But those relationships matter in that I think, at least in my case, foundations want to be partners with the organizations that they support. It's not fun, and it's not as impactful to simply write a check. So bring them in, involve them in your purpose, in your mission, in your program. And it's not just in the application process, it's in the process of, you don't want that one check, you want a long-term relationship. Maybe that check grows bigger, or maybe you simply get introductions to somewhere or whatever, but think of those relationships as being authentic, because they should be. Don't be afraid of the foundation. Don't be afraid that you're going to take their time by reaching out. That's why they get up in the morning too, is to help you, is to partner with you. And I just keep wanting to underscore that word partner. And I think that's really important. And the others, and so I would just say flat out, don't submit an application to a foundation unless you've had a conversation with the program officer at that foundation. I mean, nothing is going to happen. It could save you a lot of time if it's just not possible. And two other just small details that I think are really important. Don't try to squeeze what you do into the mission of a given foundation. It can either get you as a nonprofit leader doing something that is aside from your mission or is not one of your priorities. And the other thing is, it's obvious, and foundations want to support organizations that are collectively committed to the mission of that foundation. And finally, and I'll be very curious as to when any of my peers agree, you don't have to go on for a long time. If there's a 2,000 word limit, you don't have to use all 2,000 words, because those people are at home on Sunday afternoon trying to get all of their proposals read as well. So whereas it's like with individuals, whereas we know what we do is really interesting. We know that it's really important to communicate absolutely every aspect of it, but it's not. Think about yourself as the reader. And I think that, I literally have had, when I was fundraising myself, had my husband read a proposal, because you want to make sure you're speaking English, and you want to make sure you're not speaking too much English.
So
I saw you nod.
Go ahead, Ann.
No, absolutely. I was just concurring with everything that Ann said. Eileen, go ahead.
Yeah. So let me hop in just for a second. And I totally agree with Tony and Ann in terms of the fit, because you can't fit a square peg in a round hole, especially with a community foundation. It's not a good way to start off a relationship at all. But once you do find perhaps there may be a fit, I do think, again, going back to it's all about relationships, go to your board and, seek out those who might know someone also who is involved with the foundation. This is, again, that initial foot in the door discussion. I had an experience, again, of being a startup. And, there's a lot of competition in the marketplace. And had it not been for someone who had a relationship to say, hey, will you give her 45 minutes of your time just to hear what this is about in terms of, our founding board chair, we would not have perhaps been successful in getting our first foot in the door with a major community foundation that Paul Putman knows very well. And so I do want to emphasize relationships. It doesn't mean you're going to get funded, but it may give you an opportunity to at least get someone to lend an ear, to be exposed to what in the world do you do? Why do you do it? And how do you do it different than other people? And, not even talk about funding yet. I think that's another thing is, sometimes it's just, that visit is simply to educate and to get to know one another, and then look at the pursuit further down the road. So my 2 cents.
And for fear of being redundant, I don't want to restate anything that's been said, but the one thing that I will add is that once you do have audience with the community foundation, don't be afraid to share who else and how else you're being funded. Those founders, they like to know who else is funding you. and they like to know, or they like to seek opportunities where their funding can be braided, and because it can either extend their dollars or their dollars could send you over the top. And I think that is a good way to capture their imagination as it relates to return on investment. Because if other funding has you 90% there and their funding can take you over the top, then that could be a quick win for them, which is something that they like to communicate back to their constituents. So don't be afraid to share your funding. Sometimes I know nonprofits like to hold that back, but I think the more transparent you are about where your money is coming from, the more opportunities I think is open up. Because I know that some funders are, they don't like to be first in terms of funding organizations. So be honest about that. And if they're going to be first, tell them why and tell them what they're buying. And if they're not going to be first, be honest about who else is funding you. I think it has an opportunity to have a very meaningful and interesting conversation.
LaShawn, that's a great point. And the funders in town, at least in Cleveland, we all talk to each other. Right, so you're not hiding anything by not saying that up front, because we're gonna call St. Luke's, we're gonna call Gun Foundation and others to find out kind of what does the picture look like holistically. There was some great answers. I'm just going to add just real quick from the Cleveland Foundation standpoint. Our program team, like all of you, has been adjusting, right? Since it's March, it's been a seismic shift. And with the COVID Rapid Response Fund, went from grant making once a month to grant making every week for a period of time, and just a huge amount of extra things on our plates, just like on everyone's plate on this call. So I know it can be frustrating right now to sometimes get a hold of folks. I will offer to the folks who are on this call, and the folks on this call only, I'm just kidding, that if you want to get connected with the Cleveland Foundation, you can contact me. I'll put my contact information in the chat, and I'm happy to help make that connection for you. So I can help connect to donor advised funds, but if you don't know which program person to talk to, and Eileen was exactly right in saying, find out who might know someone, have that personal connection. If you're a small nonprofit, if you don't know anyone at the Cleveland Foundation, you know me now, so you can send an email to me and I'll be happy to help make that connection for you. Okay. So, and I see some questions starting to come in during the chat, so thank you. Continue to add your questions to the chat function. This one came in advance. I thought it was a really interesting question. And the person who wrote this said that, COVID's been terrible, but some of the things I frankly don't miss. And they had an example of, doing things like 20 health fairs in a single year. And the question for the panel is, as we come out of this crisis, which we hope is sooner rather than later, but at whatever point in time we come out of the crisis and the quarantine, can we come out of the crisis doing things more efficiently and collaboratively, and then let the community know how to help us to better help them? I see some thinking on this one.
Okay, Paul, I will.
Go ahead, Tony.
I will jump out on this one. As I said to you in my introduction, one of the areas that I find as a strength is collaborations and partnerships, especially public-private. And one of the things I think that all of us should be using this time in COVID to do is reflect while we can on the impact and outcomes of our work as nonprofits. What are the needs of the community? They have definitely changed as a result of COVID. Have we discussed the needs with the actual beneficiaries of our services, those who patronize? Have we discussed how our board what is their perspective on what we're doing? Have we discussed it with volunteers? Because as you have those discussions, you should then naturally ask the question, how can we address them? And can we alone fully address them? And if we cannot, how can we augment that work by partnering with another nonprofit or a local organization or corporation or government entity or NGO that may want to work with us in resolving a challenge or a barrier or a need in our communities? COVID has flushed out a lot of things that we have not thought about. And I immediately go back to the fact that education was impacted, and we have many educational nonprofits, but there was a reality that students depended on schools for their food. And so those who took care of food insecurity found themselves partnering more closely with educational nonprofits to together work and finding solutions. We need to look to each other, and I'm going to give an example of where I was able to do this in the past. The Montgomery County Public Libraries is the largest library system in Maryland. They were having a rapid decline prior to COVID in middle school students actually using the libraries. And there was a corresponding decline in test scores in language and literacy. We partnered with them when I was at the Community Media Center as a public access station to say, okay, we're going to help you encourage students to go to the library by saying simply they can become the Siskel and Ebert of books if the students actually went out and met with a library and checked out a book, and then we would bring them in, we would go into the library and we would record the students telling us about the book and giving it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. They could do it with friends, they could do it alone. And it was amazing how it turned out. We taught the librarians how to edit those videos. We put them on television. It is now a 10-year ongoing initiative. It was funded by the NBC Universal Comcast Foundation heavily. And we found that the attendance went up. So we looked for need, found we couldn't do it alone. They couldn't do it alone, but together we had a solution. And frankly, funders look for these collaborations and partnerships. So it's a matter of examining yourself and then talking to your peers. And you can be very, very successful in this field, very successful in this area.
Tony, that's a great suggestion. And what I'll say is my answer is probably not going to help you have less meetings, but what it will do is take what we've learned from COVID and apply it into some new context as we move forward. What we've learned about this period of pandemic is that smaller, more intimate connections are having a tremendous impact on relationships. So as you're thinking about your connections to the community, think about those opportunities to have hyper-specific and place-based interactions, meaning you're going into neighborhoods to have a specific conversation about their needs rather than going to the massive fair and trying to catch everyone. I think what we've seen is that the more sustainable relationships are now being where you're tailoring your messaging to specific neighborhoods and communities rather than trying to catch everyone in one big swoop. And I think this period of smaller groups and the restrictions of how many people can come together has helped us understand that those smaller, more intimate conversations are making much more meaning of the relationships that we're trying to establish as nonprofits. So I think hopefully that's something that we carry into the new normal, is this idea of small, specific, and place-based interactions as ways to engage and support our communities.
No, that's great. Thank you both. Wanted to turn to a question from the chat function. And as we know, during the pandemic, a lot of nonprofits have had to drop their annual events and haven't been able to have the big galas or the golf outings or whatever it might be. I'm curious about, during the pandemic, how can we keep donor relations intact and encourage donors to keep on giving even though we can't have those annual events? And Tony, I'm going to turn it over to you first, and then we're going to turn it to Ann after that.
Thank you for that question. I have been very fortunate to be involved with an organization that just recently did a virtual gala, and we had over 200 people attend, and we actually exceeded our fundraising goal. So there are a couple of lessons that came out of it. Although we are in virtual times, there are traditional things that we can do to make our donors stay engaged with us. And I would say nothing is more important still than the person-to-person phone call and message that you can have. People love to know you care about them. People know that you want to know that you've heard and remember their passion about helping others. And so when you can share with them success stories and needs and listen to their questions and give them feedback, they adore you. So please continue to do that. Two, I have found in my personal experience that recording, if you are able in your nonprofit, some nonprofits are not able to do this for very specific reasons that have to do with legalities as well as confidentiality. But if you are able to do this in your nonprofit, get some of your donors to either record why they give and share that with others. Get some of your of those that have benefited from your services to do a recording and tell about the impact, or those that work with them to tell about the impact. We often forget people want to know that their support didn't go into a big void. They want to know that they made a difference. And you can do that by video, and you can email blast that out. You can do it on sessions online, put it on your social media. That's incredibly, incredibly important. And finally, do virtual gatherings. We're right here doing a virtual panel. People love to know that you just wanted to update them, and they get a kick out of it. We had, and do some things that are innovative. I will tell you, on our gala, we had a chef who actually did a virtual follow along with me and cook a meal, and the people adored it. They absolutely adored it. We would do breaks and transitions and talk about what was going on, and he would come back and take you through the next step of cooking. So find things, whether it's storytelling, cooking, whatever you can come up with, and keep your donor excited about your mission. Just because we are sheltering in place doesn't mean we can't reach out and touch them. We may not be able to hug them right now, we may not be able to hold their hands, but we can directly give them feedback.
Right, and probably more important now to do that as it ever has been, for sure.
I think the creativity that I've seen in so many regards is actually an opportunity. I think there are some ways in which we're never going to go back to the way it was. And some of that's probably for the good. It may be blasphemy, but events are not as cost effective as other kinds of fundraising. So if I were to be asked the question, I would say, well, if you want money, spend your time doing something else, because you're dealing with so much expense and so much institutional energy. But I think the good side of events is their ability, is donors and stakeholders' ability to connect with the organization and feel part of the organization. And so the idea that I couldn't say any better than Tony is finding ways to connect with them. Now, excuse me, there are online auctions. There are, a million. I went to a retirement party that I thought was going to be a mess, and it was fantastic. Legal Aid is having its annual benefit. That usually have a huge one. They're having it anyway. I'm really curious to see how that shakes out. They're actually recording the speeches in advance because Zoom gets a little difficult, when you get, so then you have to get technical and call Paul about, like, do you do Zoom or, WebEx or, whatever, how that works. But I think that we begin to see the creativity. And I think if you keep your eye on the prize, which is, it's not just, it's that you are sincerely interested, that you do recognize that these people, these stakeholders, these donors are the ones that have made your mission possible. And there's a lot of respect to have, I think, for those people. So you, the organization, need to continue to show them how important they are, and not in a flattery kind of way, but in a, like, we're in this together kind of way. And everybody understands, but I think that the creative ways of keeping people connected are vital, because I always used to say, even if you invite 1,000 people to an event and 100 people show up and 100 people RSVP, those RSVPs show that they care, and that they care about, being respectful of you and caring about you. It's not just junk mail. So that's the key, is we want to incorporate people. It's an opportunity to get rid of, frankly, the expensive prospect of events, but also to come up with new ways, maybe more intimate ways. What if you had a weekly subject or something like that, and people could attend. That's great. They're connecting with you. You can follow up with that with a solicitation. It doesn't cost you any money. And if you're just sitting in your living room on the phone, why not? So keep the connection, keep the connection, keep the connection.
I just want to hop in and say, you know, I think while Tony gave a lot of creative techniques such as videos and whatnot, that is really important regardless of COVID or not. I mean, those are techniques that are well served pre-COVID, where you're always helping your donors and your stakeholders understand the value added. What have they done? What is the impact? So, you know, while Tony called it out because his question about, you know, no longer with events and how can you connect, those connections are critical no matter what. And so I want to just underscore always being able, we used to call it ambassador emails, where all we wanted to do, we did not want to ask for money. We wanted to share what your money was doing. And we did that quarterly. So it was a constant, let us, you know, put us in front of you, not always asking for money. And so I just, you know, it just struck me when you were mentioning about the techniques in response to this, Tony. Those were things that I just think are well-founded, regardless of COVID or not COVID.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Eileen. And the Gathering Place is always so good at really engaging donors and sharing their story. And so there's a lot to be said for that constant communication. I want to pivot the group a little bit. And another question that had come in prior to this call was looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you know, certainly 2020 has had kind of a renewed focus on this, long overdue. And many organizations have been working on this to some extent for years, but now there's kind of this wave of focus, which is nice to see. And, you know, the question is, what's the most visible thing that we could do to tell our staff and community that we're serious about this beyond just, you know, in May and June, you saw a lot of organizations put out a statement on their website. But what is something else that we can do? And I'm going to turn to LaShawn first, because this is one of your areas of expertise, but then open it up to the whole panel.
Thanks, Paul. And this question I get a lot, and I will honestly tell you, the statements, while they're a great gesture, they are performative in nature. And the thing that I think has the most traction that you can do and you have ownership over is disaggregating your own data and making that transparent for others to see, so that people can understand how you are looking at your own disproportionality and how you are investigating for yourself, how you are representing and working through a racial justice lens. And once you can demonstrate that internal accountability, then you can advocate for external accountability, because you are holding yourself in this very transparent way accountable for your outcomes. And once you do that, you also are sharing what it is you're doing to address that disproportionality if it exists. What's also true is that if you are knocking it out the park as it relates to the Black and brown children or families that you serve, then you probably are very much a part of a small minority of those that are doing that very well. And so it will establish you as a leader in the industry that is achieving great outcomes on behalf of Black and brown people. And because of that, there's a credibility that comes with your advocacy also. But then the other thing is that you engage in consistent action and dialogue with your constituents of color. Because the one thing that I will say is that many times we try to put in place initiatives for a community without having any interaction with them prior to the implementation. And having their voice be heard as part of the design it sounds novel, but it's necessary, because it's part of being responsive to their cultural needs and allowing them to inform you on your process. And so that's another thing that you can do. But then also, and I guess the last two things that I'll say is allocating the appropriate resources to the work and sharing how that will be deployed with the community. And then also establishing a permanent decision-making position that focuses on this work in your organization if it's possible. Many organizations will establish the director of DEI or the director of diversity, and though that person is so far down the hierarchy that decisions they make have to go through so many filters that by the time a choice is being made, they have no longer had influence over the options. And so that person being at the decision-making senior leadership level is an important component to demonstrate your value of the work, and also that it's being considered at the very highest levels of your organization as it relates to its influences on all of your decisions and all of your agency choices. And so I would say those are the things that I would do right away. And I'd say the first one, obviously, the disaggregating data is not something that's terribly hard to do. It's just being intentional about looking at your data and disaggregating across those cultural identifiers.
You know, LaShawn, we have a follow-up question just in terms of, especially for smaller organizations, often you might have staff that is very enthusiastic and ready to do more than just kind of make that performative statement. But sometimes it's hard to get board buy-in. So do you have any tips or recommendations for how to have those conversations with your board and to get them on board, so to speak?
Yeah, so two things with the board. One is, I am a firm believer in that the conversation is part of the action. So there are many people who want to just jump to doing the work, but don't have the skills around having the conversation, not only internally, but with the community. And so what ends up happening is that instead of being in dialogue, instead of having a conversation with the community, it sounds more like, I'm gonna borrow a term from another researcher, a quizversation. And that's where you go to your Black and brown constituents, you just quiz them for information. And you're not in dialogue. You're just drilling them with questions. How can I help? What can I need? What do you need? And that is also can put people off, because this is you coming to them to solve the problems that maybe you created, right? And so it's really about having conversation. And with your board, I would say that once you've started to disaggregate that data, put that information in front of your board and say, is this the organization we want to be, right? And then the question becomes, is really, so there's a body of work around racial equity assessments. And the simplified version of this is I'm gonna give you 4 questions that you can ask your board. The first question is, who do we wanna be? The second question is, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And who is impacted or benefits from our choices? And if the board considers those 4 questions at every decision point, then you're going to be making more equitable choices as an organization. And so, and what undergirds that is the data that you put in front of them, and ask them to respond to those questions by looking at their data. If the data is not achieving the outcomes that you've hoped for, then you have some work to do to address the work that you're trying to do in your community.
You know, that's fantastic. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wanted to jump in on this. Tony?
Yeah, Paul, I want to share with everyone some realities that, and it dovetails exactly with what LaShawn said. One of the things that your organization needs to realize is that inclusion, diversity, equity, and access do directly impact your revenue streams. I know this because as a grant reviewer for the United Way, there are questions on the grant that actually ask, how has your organization exhibited that it's been intentionally taking actions in the affirmative in this area? And I, as a reviewer for the United Way National Capital Area, have to score that question. So that's one thing. This is, and Paul, you know this, for many foundations, this is a common question. Here in the Mid-Atlantic region, it's actually become almost a standard. So I want you all to know that when you talk to your boards and your executive leadership, it has a bottom line impact. That's the first point. The second point is, this does not happen overnight. And I would challenge all of you to go look up examples of diversity and inclusion strategic plans where you actually map out a diversity and inclusion strategic plan, give it a defined timeline, do assign tactics so that you can show to your supporters and funders and the communities that you serve that you're intentional in your commitment to making actions that are inclusive and that raise and lift all. Those are fairly new, but you can do them, and I think it helps everyone know we're not asking for overnight change, we're asking for intentional action.
Oh, those are great. And I would add that your local community foundation in Cleveland is also looking at these issues in a new way, in terms of funding, in terms of how they impact all of our programs. I might add that this work is best done with a sense of humbleness. And if you can convince your organization to be transparent around your work, I think that helps your own organization in terms of your staff and your board and your own internal growth and learning, but also helps let the community know that it's a joint journey, I guess, in terms of working together on things. I don't know if
Well,
Eileen or Ann, if you wanted to jump in. Oh,
yeah,
LaShawn, go ahead.
Fall to that point. I think the two terms, to your point, are culturally responsive and cultural humility. Those two things can inform how you engage from a culturally responsive or from an equity standpoint. So having those two things embedded in your organizational DNA will take you a very long way in how you support and serve communities of color, or of any other underrepresented population.
No, agreed. And I think it's not uncommon for organizations to want to say that we espouse those things versus really being serious about it, right? It's hard to be self-critical. Thanks. All right, so going to go back to a question regarding donors that came in. And so maybe we'll start with Tony and we'll go to others on this one. So the question is, once you get a recent donor on the phone, what's the best way to get them more involved with the agency? In other words, what is the next step I should take to cultivate the donor once you get them on the phone and they've already given once?
Oh, and they've already given once?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I love to recite is we have 2 ears, 1 mouth, and we should use them proportionately. Listen to your donor. If they have given before, I always love to ask the question, what moved you to make that first gift? Or what moved you to support us from the very beginning? What was the story behind your interest and your commitment? You will be surprised at the answers that you will receive from some of your donors. I also love to ask them, what are their other areas of support? What other organizations that they have found is important enough to them that they have given their time, their talent, their treasure, so that I can learn more about their varieties of interests. And it really informs me as to how I can match. It's like going on a date and I'm matching up attributes and skills and interests. And I always look at being a fundraiser as dating my donors, whether the donors are corporations or individuals or foundations. And I want you to think about that and know this is not you sitting back with Tinder and doing a left swipe right. It is you listening intently to their interests. Once I have heard those things, I very diligently introduce things that we have done that match up with their passions. I give them recent examples of success that align with what they are trying to achieve. But it's always me responding to their interest, their passion. The only way to describe this is donor centricity is the height of my responsiveness and in my engagement with them. I will often try to keep that call focused and brief, and then may follow back up with them after I've listened to their stories and their interests and said, you talked about your love of animals, and let me tell you, and I'm going to give a good Make-A-Wish example. You talked about how you give into the Humane Society and you love taking care of pets and making sure they're well loved. We at Make-A-Wish actually give pets to children with critical illnesses, both for comfort and for giving them an outlet that distracts them from their experiences. And would you like to see one of those stories? And I may send them a video, or would you like to speak, if we have an opportunity at that time, with one of our mission delivery people who worked on that project? It gets them jazzed. So I would say to you, always listen first. Write down, literally write down, all of those items that they have shown you as why they gave to others, what their interests were, what were their passions, and then be responsive to that. It builds a very, very long-term relationship with people that even makes you sometimes have a new friend that you didn't know you were going to have.
Absolutely, that personalization is critical. And you have something to add.
I do. You know, one of the things is if you can invite them to you. Again, there's no better way in most cases to find out about what you do than to see it. So, and in some cases it's harder to see than in others. I used to work for the food bank, right? And so we could invite people and, you know, show them 1.2 million pounds of food. But as somebody who's been to a bunch of organizations, I can tell you that I appreciated the invitation a lot. And you know, so don't be afraid to invite. In fact, it's great to invite. Anybody can always say no, but they still like having been invited. I take a little bit of a left turn on one of the things, which is that when people, yes, ears, listening is important, but what you want to do is not make a case, is show them what they made possible. And so you're treating the whole thing with, you know, humility has been used a couple of times, and I love that word, because you shouldn't act humble. You should be humble about what you do and about people's investment in it. But, you know, after that first gift, I think somebody justifiably wants to see that it makes a difference. And that, also being willing to do that for a $20 donor and a $20,000 donor, I think is so important. You know, for a while, I used to, in every single thank you note, say, if you're interested in seeing us, please, you know, give me a buzz. And some people did, you know, not many, but they felt that invitation again, which I think is important. And so I guess I would say with both individuals and foundations, absolutely invite them. And some of them won't have time, but certainly a lot of foundation don't, kind of their job, and they like their job. So recognize it's the return on investment. It's an investment. They are stakeholders. They are not just nice people. They chose you. Whatever it is you do, whether it's animals for Make-A-Wish or whatever it is, or however broad or narrow, they didn't choose you and Goodman. They are investing in you become a steward of their desire. They want to feed hungry people. You've got their money. You want to show them what difference it made and how important what they do is to this magnificent effort of any size or type. And by the way, size does not matter. As a foundation director, I'm as interested in a 5-person organization as I am in, you know, a huge organization. So you don't have to have humility in that regard. What you do is important, and I'm sure what you do, you believe, and that passion will show through along with your explanation. So that's the wrong word, but I just think the invitation is really important. It shows how much you care and your sincere respect for their investment.
Oh, that's such a great answer. And again, just a reminder to those who may have joined the call recently that the chat is open, so please add your questions to the chat. If you have a question that you want to keep it anonymous, you can send it to Hannah Hill, who is our chat facilitator, and we'll get it added to the list of questions to ask. And we're also working on getting Eileen back on the call. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so we are working on that as well. You know, I wanted to go a little bit broad, and I guess this question is going to be for everyone. Oh, we're moving questions around. For everyone on the call, in terms of advice that you might have for someone new to the nonprofit. We've got a number of students who are on the call with us this afternoon, and tips or advice you have for young nonprofit professionals who are entering the fields or who are looking to advance their careers within the nonprofit field.
Well, I've got a few answers on that one that I feel pretty passionately about. I mean, there are two parts to your question. One is you, the individual new to your field, and the other is new, small, nonprofit, new to the field. And I have to say that I have seen the smallest of organizations do everything great, and the largest of organizations be kind of disorganized. And so I think you want to start out with intentionality. I met with a potential client yesterday, and they are 2 years old and they don't have a staff person yet. And daggit, they haven't done everything in the right order, and, you know, gotten a strategic plan and a mission and put together a board, and, you know, they're 501c3. So it doesn't have to be a big effort. It has to be intentional, and don't make any mistakes in the beginning because you have to undo them. And there are dozens of people that will help you do that. Certainly a consultant, but you know, other peers in the nonprofit world, or even foundations. Some people love to give advice because I think from the standpoint of starting an organization, I wouldn't say it's a canned process, but there's a lot of mistakes you don't have to make. It's like having a new baby. Somebody gives you 5 tips, you're like, fine. I'd rather get the tip than learn on my own. So there are just a lot of people out there who would be willing to help. And taking those business steps in the beginning sounds so boring because you have like this desire to do X, Y, or Z, but have the structure behind you, because any mistake you do, you have to undo. And in terms of entering into the field as, you know, somebody, obviously we've got graduate students or even undergrads who they know this, they want to do this. I would be careful not to dismiss anything, because at worst it's a learning experience, and there's not much you can do. My dad said to me when I was right out of college and had a job that I wanted to leave, he said, there's not much that you can do that you can't undo at your age. So when you're starting out in the field, it's okay. You might make a mistake, but be thoughtful and don't work for something that you don't believe in. It's not like you have to have been passionate your whole life about XYZ charity, but be behind something that means something to you, and it may mean more to you the more you learn about it. So I think that's really important. And I think particularly because there's so many small nonprofits, you have to be prepared to be a jack of all trades. You know, I just did an interim stint for an organization where I was literally taking out the garbage, dealing with the accountant, and, you know, dealing with the board and the strategic plan. So that never ends. But if you're talking about the nonprofit sector, particularly smaller organizations or even medium organizations, you got to be prepared to do whatever you can to have the hands on deck.
Oops, thanks, Anne. Eileen, we were just going through and giving some advice to new nonprofit professionals or those working to advance their career. Just any tips or advice you might have. So I'll give you a second to think about that while LaShawn jumps in.
Yeah, so Ann was spot on, and I will add two things. One is when you are just starting out, whether it be as an organization or as a person, I would say always prioritize process over product. We fall so in love with our products that we lose sight of our process. And a disciplined process is going to produce a good product. So I would say focus then on the process of delivering something special rather than the thing that you want to deliver ultimately. Because if you focus too much on your product, you will miss things and you will be inflexible because you already have in your mind how you want it to look, how you want it to feel, and you won't necessarily be responsive to what the community is telling you. This is how many organizations end up having programs that no one attends because they focused on the program and not on what their constituents were saying they needed. And so it didn't fit the neighborhood, it didn't fit the community. And so it was, and ultimately the product fails because the process was not disciplined in how you implement. The other thing that I would say is for those, especially this is what I share with my mentees, is cultural humility. We talk about it a lot. And cultural humility is an internal agency identity as much as it is an external community disposition. Meaning, when you come into a new environment, you should come into that environment with some humility, recognizing that the agency has a culture. This doesn't mean that you can't come and bring your ideas, bring your innovations, bring your curiosities. But what it does mean is that there's a humility that comes along with that. I know so many young professionals that get so frustrated and so disenchanted so early on because they come into the environment with all the solutions in the world and haven't done any of the work yet. And so, it really can lead you down a path where, people like me who are 25 years in the game, were like, youngin, come over here, let me tell you something. and you because we love the energy, we want it, right? But you have to be open to that feedback when it's coming from a Paul or a Tony or Ann or Eileen or Danny, so that you can take your new ideas and incorporate it with some of that lived experience that might help inform how you can make those ideas a reality inside the space. And so coming into the environment with that understanding, knowing that there is a give and get to your energy is an important disposition to hold when you come into this work fresh out of graduate school or newly minted into the world.
Eileen's going to be the person to talk to in terms of starting an organization. So I almost hate to interrupt, but here I am doing it. From a perspective, when I see you, and I know there's one that at least Paul and I, both our organizations invested in, I fell in love with what they do, and that's not going to be enough. So I just can't, a foundation may well be willing to invest from the ground, but I think you have to show them that your processes are in order, that your business plan is thoughtful and realistic, because it can't be, oh, we're gonna hold babies and we think will work out because everyone's gonna love this. But and is whatever it is, an organization behind it that has the structure to make sure that keeps happening. Sorry, Eileen.
No, no worries. I apologize. I got kicked off of someone new into the field, find a mentor, find those people who may have more seasoning, who would be happy to be there to bounce ideas off of, or ask questions, or seek guidance, so on and so forth. But also develop relationships with colleagues in other organizations. I think it's just truly, you'll find that to be very valuable.
Those are great tips. Tony, what would you add?
I'm giving Eileen a standing ovation and a massive hug. There's a couple of things that I would say that, in addition to what everyone has presented to you. Danny and I are both active members of the Association for Fundraising Professionals. And if there is a collegiate chapter near you of the AFP, please join that chapter and be active. In every jurisdiction, there is an Association for Fundraising Professionals chapter. Drop in on a meeting. You will be surprised at your colleagues that will welcome you and will greet you and tell them what your goals are and what you're trying to do with your life. You'll be surprised at where they may direct you or whom they may introduce you to that they know that works in the field that you're seeking to place your life in. In addition to the Association for Fundraising Professionals, there are other organizations like Grant Professionals Association, but look for those opportunities. Additionally, I do want to, this is not making a plug, but I just want to tell you one of the things that really helped me out. The Association for Fundraising Professionals has both at the national level, international level, the Diversity Scholars Program. It pays for you to go to the conference in part and introduces you to key leaders in the field. I want you all to understand that when AFP does the Diversity Scholars Program, it does not mean you have to be a minority. They say very specifically, do you serve a diverse community? And that's the question. So you could be of a diverse background or serve a diverse community. I was in the very first cohort in 2013 of Diversity Scholars, and I have now helped probably almost 10 people become Diversity Scholars. It will be on the website. It's coming up fairly soon. There are also similar opportunities at the regional level. Here in the Mid-Atlantic, we have what we call the Bridge Conference, and I became a Bridge Scholar and subsequently ended up volunteering for the conferences. So these conferences and organizations are networking opportunities to find mentors and find resources. Seek them out with unrelenting passion. They're there for you. It's how you meet people like Danny. It's how you meet people like Eileen. It's how you meet people like Ann and LaShawn and Paul. So go for it, and you will be very, very happy with the outcome.
I love that, unrelenting passion. You know, I think we're all in the nonprofit field for a reason, right? And sometimes we get connected into the day-to-day and the, you know, Zoom calls and all of those types of things. And it's important to stay connected to that unrelenting passion. Thank you, Tony. I'll keep that with me. This is a follow-up question. Folks are continuing to put in questions anonymously in the chat by sending to Hannah directly. You can also put them so that they're open to everyone. We're going to ask each panelist, if you could name your number one, again, this is looking at new nonprofit professionals, those coming into the field, what would be the number one either skill, knowledge, or ability that you feel is going to be the most important for these future professionals to acquire, whether it be formally through coursework or experientially? If you had to just say your number one thing, what might that be? And Eileen, you are not muted, so I'm going to turn to you first unless you need a moment to think about it.
Ooh. Well, you know, my reaction is it varies based on what it is you're doing in your nonprofit. But what I want to say is, I think out of the gate, the need to understand how important it is to be authentic is really key coming in as a new nonprofit professional. You know, your relationship, your credibility, your cred, I think that understanding that you don't have to know it all, and and you certainly don't know it all. Job that better understand. I'm going to get back to word authenticity, because I think that that really, again, begins to, that'll follow you everywhere, or your clients, or, you know, the staff, as you rise through perhaps levels of leadership, is really
question, because I think about both myself and people I've hired. You do not have to be a specialist in something. You do not already have to know whatever it is, but a genuine, and to use Eileen's really good word, authentic interest in learning couldn't be more important, whatever it is. It's such a it's such an important thing for your boss or your organization to see your enthusiasm, hard work, ingenuity. But in an interview, it's like being yourself. It's like having the confidence to be yourself is a great thing when you're interviewing somebody. And be willing genuinely to work hard. Some of us are old, and you know, when we started working, it was different ethos, and people worked really, really late. And now it makes sense culturally to, you know, oh, it's 5 o'clock, and I'll go. And that doesn't mean you're not committed, but be thinking about the job that needs to get done, rather, you know, in any given day. That could mean you have to stay till 5:30. But if you are always focused, if your focus is on the prize and getting the job done, that's just early career for young people advice. But eagerness and being yourself, because if you're not yourself, you're screwed, because, you know, 2 weeks later, they're going to find out something else. So just be yourself.
I would agree with that. The one thing that I would say as an introvert, as I am, is nail your first 30 seconds. When you are interacting with new people, the confidence you exude in that first 30 seconds, being able to nail your elevator speech, nail your mission, nail your vision, nail your purpose, that 30 seconds can go a very long way. Now, you have to back that up with work, but nailing that first 30 seconds can make a lot of difference in terms of the type of conversation you have with funders and also community providers, and especially when you go into neighborhoods or communities that have historically been underserved. There's a embedded caution when new people come into the neighborhood to say they want to serve them. And so being able to nail that first 30 seconds, be authentic and clear about what services you bring to that community, will help you gain some allies who can help grant you their credibility as you try to establish it on in an ongoing way. Because that's why I say the work that has to back up that is so important. But that first 30 seconds can get you into the conversation in a way that's pretty meaningful. So get an elevator speech that you're confident, and you can exude that confidence in really meaningful ways, and then back it up with your work.
Mine dovetails with LaShawn's. Something, as a person who's hired new teammates and as a person who's interviewed for others, please, as young professionals, nail your communication skills. Nothing is more important in the nonprofit community than being able to be an accurate, sincere, and impactful writer. I find that today's world of texting and social media tweets has greatly reduced communication skills. Grammar still counts. Structure still counts. Secondly, nail your, and this goes with what I've just said, nail your presentation skills. And that dovetails on what LaShawn was saying. It is important, especially in environments like today where you have to do things virtually or even across the telephone, but face-to-face, your communication and presentation skills are incredibly important. Ask if you can, as Eileen said, ask if you can practice that with a mentor. Take your writings and share them with someone like Paul and Anne, and have them critique. You know, give your presentation to LaShawn. That is one of the most important skills you're going to have, no matter what your profession is. But the nonprofit and philanthropic industry, we live and die on communication skills. So please work on your writing, work on your presentations.
Those are fantastic answers. You know, I can't help but want to add just a quick note to, you know, someone talked about being a lifelong learner, and everyone I know in this room is, and the importance of that. And I might add leading into discomfort, because if something doesn't feel comfortable to you, there's probably really good learning in it. So if there's something where you're like, yeah, I don't really like budgets, maybe pay attention and learn a little bit more about budgets or data collection or the technology software, or whatever it might be. So lean into that. We are coming up on 10 minutes before the hour and want to get into our last final question. So again, if you have any questions that are burning questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will work them in. And I think, you know, and we've talked a lot of different topics today. And as we get towards the close of the hour, I want to ask a little bit general again for each panelist to think through the nonprofit sector, kind of going broad again. So as you think about the sector and the as a whole and the industry, if you could change one thing about the way that the nonprofit sector is working right now, what might you change about that and why? And this is another one that came anonymously through the chat, which I think is a great question. So what one thing would you change about how the nonprofit sector works, and why might you choose that to change? And Anne, I saw you unmute right away for this one.
Well, it's funny, I just wrote a blog on this, but there's one thing I hate, which is nonprofit sector, because, and it's used all the time, and I used it on my website, and, you know, I'm not singling anyone out, but, you know, I think about the breadth of the kinds of organizations, the size, the focus versus breadth of the missions. I mean, there's so much about the nonprofit sector. But one of the things that I would love to see more of, and I saw a heck of a lot at the St. Luke's Foundation, is business approach. And that's got a bad connotation, right? For those of us in the nonprofit world, we're not a business, we're a nonprofit. Of course you are, and you're not trying to make money, and your the ROI for your donors is the achievement of your mission. Absolutely, all those things are true. But you have employees, you have a balance sheet, you have things that need to get done. You need to have a budget that reflects values, but you need to have a budget, and you need to hold yourselves to that budget, even if it's only to find out that you're way off budget. Then you have to figure out why. So I guess to me is I would like to see a more business-like approach to what is fairly, generally speaking, inefficient. You know what I mean? Like running nonprofits, you're not trying to make money. You don't have a, but I would like to see professionalism, maybe business is the wrong word, responsibility with using resources, understanding your staff as, you know, the most important thing that you need to support in terms of mission achievement and organizational strength. If you don't pay them well, if you don't treat them well, if you don't provide them opportunities for success and growth, they're going to leave. And if they keep leaving, your ability to achieve your mission is again impacted. So I think it's the parts of nonprofit organizations, somehow the boring parts that I would like to see changed a bit, and not in all cases whatsoever. But I think an approach to having strong architecture that is not just your mission, but is organizational strength. I rambled, but do you get the idea?
I'd be happy to hop in. You actually stole that right out of my mouth, Ann, because I do believe that, again, coming from someone who started with a vision and built an organization, if I didn't have a business plan immediately to be able to present to those businesses, corporations, and larger foundations, to give all I was doing right in the beginning was selling myself. I mean, I didn't have all of the other ancillary kinds of anecdotal information. So a business plan, again, serving as a business. So now I'll shift to the second thing I would have said, since Ann already addressed this one, but that is, working in silos is not a good thing in the nonprofit world in your organization. And I'll tell you, one of the things that is a pet peeve of mine is that you have, quote, those people who do the fundraising in your organization. Well, guess what? Everybody fundraises in your organization. It doesn't matter what you do. You may be in charge. You may be responsible for overseeing the fundraising as your development director or chief development officer. But everyone is always looking to engage people, no matter what you're doing for your organization. It isn't one person's responsibility to make sure that there's sound fiscal that you're in a sound fiscal position. It's everyone's responsibility. And also to be good stewards of your resources is everyone's responsibility. So that's a pet peeve that I have in the nonprofit world is, oh no, that's their role. They raise the money. No, everybody needs to be on board in a nonprofit to understand how you raise the money and the conversations you can engage in to, again, help that happen.
Spot on, Eileen, and I was going to take that to in a different direction and say that collaborate to elevate and amplifying each other's voices. No one nonprofit can serve all the need. So think about partnerships and going after dollars together. I think more nonprofits should be looking at each other as allies and partners, and looking at these RFPs that are put out there and saying, you do that well and I do this well. How about we go together after these dollars and make a stronger case for why we should be funded? Because if I go by myself and allow for my mission to creep into a space where I don't really belong, then it will ultimately weaken my application, and also weaken the community, because you deserve those dollars to do that work. So, but we go together, then maybe we can develop an even stronger partnership, a stronger bond, a stronger relationship, which ultimately would mean stronger services to the community. So collaborate to elevate and amplify each other's voices.
LaShawn, from your lips to God's ears, thank you. One of the things that I have seen from both small nonprofits, small shops, as well as large nonprofits, if I could change anything, that would be the commitment to providing resources for staff members to engage in continual learning. We all give a lot of lip service to it, but it is one of the first line items to zero out when we are looking to make budget cuts or realign priorities. Nothing is more important than a well-skilled staff, and nothing is more critical to the organization. I have found that when I have gone personally to training and learning opportunities, that the discussions that I'll have with my classmates and peers will often generate new ideas that I'll implement back in my shop. And so that would not have occurred had we not had the investment in lifelong and continual learning in our organization. So that would be one of the major things I would just tell people. Do not zero out that line item ever. Always invest in your staff. It will pay for itself tenfold.
If we could
And
make
I
those
would
4
add-
changes. Go ahead, Ann.
I would add to that. Somebody once told me, and I was talking about it last night. If you do nothing else, spend more time hiring, because there is no world, there's no organization, there's no effort, there's no nothing where it isn't a team of people that make it happen. Yeah, so it's not just investing in them, which I agree is a cornerstone, and providing them leadership opportunity or continuous learning opportunities and opportunities for growth. But I just think that the hiring process can't be underscored enough in terms of its importance.
Perfect. Oh, these would be such great improvements, and cheers to making them all happen. I want to turn it back to Danny as we come up on the hour.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Tony, Ann, LaShawn, and Eileen. This was so fantastic, and I've always wanted to do this, and this was a great opportunity. So thank you for joining me and us on this. For our students and community leaders on the call, thank you for being here. You know, fundraising, executive leadership, nonprofit work, this is a group effort and a team sport. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for the work that you do on behalf of the communities we serve. Please join me in thanking our panelists and moderator. Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. Please, everyone, stay safe. Happy Thanksgiving. I am grateful for each of you.